So, welcome to the next podcast for the International Academic Network, Popular Psychology, Self-Help Culture, and the Happiness Industry. I'm Daniel Nehring, and today I welcome Kristiina Brunila and Hanna Ylöstalo. Kristiina works as a professor of social justice and equality in education at the University of Helsinki, and she's also the director of the International Research Center AGORA for the study of social justice and equality. And Hanna is senior lecturer in sociology at the University of Turku. So to start with, could I ask you both to introduce yourselves a little bit more, say a little bit about who you are, what you do, how you describe yourselves as scholars?
Okay, maybe I can start. Yeah. So I'm a gender studies scholar and a feminist political sociologist. I work currently at the University of Turku, and for the last maybe 17, 18 years, I have investigated various social phenomena from a feminist and gender perspective. And my previous research projects have concerned, for example, work and organizations, politics and policy making, feminist pedagogy, therapeutic cultures, and qualitative research methodology, especially ethnography.
Mm-hmm. Kristiina, would you like?
Okay, and I can continue. Yeah, well, I guess I often describe myself as a sociologist with a twist.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a feminist scholar, critical scholar, someone who is interested in asking difficult questions about things people generally do not want to talk about. This is something I experience all the time. I'm really keen on studying power relations, governance, hierarchies, inequalities, and just in general, what is going on in the world and in our society. So I guess that's about me.
All right. So I guess we've all got a lot of, let's say, intellectual interests in common: gender, feminism, power, therapeutic, cultures. We share all that. How did you come to those topics? How did your interest in those topics start? And how did you go on to develop as academics from there? Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, I can maybe now take my turn. To put it shortly, I guess there was a lot of luck involved and brilliant people who guided me and whose intellectual ideas have showed me the way. And I went to the university rather late as an adult. And before that, I tried a lot of different things. And then finally, university felt like home. And these scholars, I think that's a good question. These scholars who have influenced me strongly have been mostly feminist thinkers in my field and beyond. And scholars who really challenge the status quo, who really ask difficult questions, who dare to be killjoys, and who want to make this world more fair. And I could perhaps mention scholars like, well, Judith Butler, Bronwyn Davis, Gayatri Chakravorty-Spivak, Elizabeth Adams-St. Paddy Ladder, Sara Ahmed, and here in Finland, intellectuals like Leena Koski and Päivi Naskali. But of course, I have to mention one person, Michel Foucault, who ruined my sense of reality a long time ago. I mean, my research wouldn't exist if I didn't read Michel Foucault. Go ahead, Hanna.
Thanks, Kristiina. I guess my career path is similar in some respects and different in some other respects. I actually went to the university straight after high school, and at that time I chose sociology because I was a bit unsure about what I want to do when I grow up, and sociology seemed kind of vague enough for me at that point. But actually, at the university, I discovered that there is this thing called gender studies. So actually, it was called women's studies at the time, at the late 1990s. And with women's studies, it was like love at the first sight for me. And it became my academic home and my intellectual community. And it is in these circles that Kristiina and I have met each other as well. And as I studied women's studies at the university, I read like about feminist epistemology by Donna Haraway, and about post-humanism from Rosi Braidotti, and about race and pedagogy by Bell Hooks, and of course about performativity of gender by Judith Butler. And like Kristiina mentioned earlier, like everything that I read just completely changed my world. And with feminist theories, I kind of learned to question everything around me and kind of understand the power relations that are embedded in the society. And I think therapeutic cultures are my perhaps most recent discovery in the feminist field. It's not just feminist work, but it's very much influenced by many feminist thinkers. And I think in this field, especially the work by Eva Illouz has inspired my thinking a lot.
Okay, great. So those are what you've just described, the intellectual starting points, which indeed for all of us again overlap very closely. And then along the way of your intellectual career so far, what would you consider your major achievements or the major projects or the major pieces of research that you have undertaken? Would you like to describe a little bit what you've done?
Well, yeah, I can start. Well, I mean, as I said before, maybe I started my research career with work and organizations research, and I worked in a range of research projects that concerned gender work and organizations, and how organizations and work cultures, as well as labor market policies, how they kind of reproduce gender inequality. And I have also done some research on class and race and age, but I guess I'm a bit old-fashioned feminist in the sense that I have always been mainly interested in gender perspective. But over maybe last 10 years or so, my research has focused more on politics and policymaking, and especially gender equality policy. And my most recent research has been concerned with gendered economy society relations, and feminist political economy and feminist economics as well. And I think since the 2007 and 8 global financial crisis, there was suddenly this like surge of feminist analysis of crisis and austerity, and I was really kind of fascinated by this whole discussion. And at that time I realized, of course, as a feminist scholar, that it is mainly male economists and male politicians that talk about economy and economic policies in public, and for that reason, like female-dominated spheres of life are completely missing from these discussions, like issues such as unpaid labor and reproductive work. And in Finland, there has actually been very few feminist scholars who were interested in the hardcore of economy, like economics as a form of knowledge, and economic policy, and especially the most kind of technical issues like the budgets and so forth. And although it has been quite scary to take part in these discussions in my research, because I'm not an economist myself, but I thought that, okay, I have been researching work and politics and power for last 15 years, so I can do this, and that's what I have been doing for past maybe 5 years or so.
Yes, that's very interesting. I came myself to my research in many ways through when I was an undergraduate, a class I took with Diane Elson, who was then and still is a leading feminist economist. So that's actually an area that has always interested me very much. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, she's one of the people who has inspired my work as well. And actually we invited Diane Elson to Finland to talk about feminist economic policies maybe 5 years ago, and a Finnish newspaper, Helsingin Sanomat, interviewed her, and the interview was published with the title something like Feminism Entered Finnish Economic Policies, and that was pretty awesome. Yeah, but sorry, Kristiina, continue.
No, I love to listen to you, Hanna, and I must say that I really respect Hanna's research, and she has become such a public figure, but important, powerful researcher in terms of, you know, economic discourses and bringing more feminist approaches in. So really happy to hear about that. Well, my professorship is related to social justice and equality in education. So I guess my questions related to inequalities, fairness, power relations are something that are very crucial in my research. And I guess through my academic life, I have at least tried to ask difficult questions related to inequalities. What exactly this society in this world keeps reproducing inequalities and privileges, hierarchies, status quo, in terms of policies, cultures, and practices in education, but also beyond, and with what outcome. And not everyone likes these questions, I can assure that. So it's not a perky, happy-go-lucky life as a critical researcher who doesn't want to accept things as they seem to be. And I have wanted to make power relations visible so that we can see how power and forms of inequalities operate. But I guess I have also tried to find ways to go beyond and challenge these inequalities. And research has provided also an opportunity to go to places. And I want to mention that I really wanted to go to prison, for example, and to take part in prison education, because I wanted to see what the situation was. And I can say that it was a very poor situation, although we have laws that should ensure proper education for everyone. I have also worked a long time with young people coming from very different life situations. Young people who live with poverty, with mental health problems, with experiences of racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination. And I have asked what our society has to offer for these young people, and I can tell you that it's not a lot. And one side project of mine has been to show how economic imperatives take hold of academics and universities, and how this happens in practice, and how to resist this very powerful imperatives we are expected to submit to and master. And I'm really concerned by higher education at the moment. And also I have to mention that one important shift in my research relates to education. As a younger scholar, I was very naive, and I tended to think that education is an answer to all kinds of problems. And now I tend to think that education itself is becoming a bigger problem all the time, like a hub of various agendas, interests, power play, with more efficient behavioral and economic governance than ever. But however, here in Finland, we do not want to talk about these problems related to education. So the problems keep growing.
Concretely, what problems do you mean? Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, shortly, like marketization, privatization, also lack of wider perspectives related to social sciences, sociology, history, philosophy, cultural aspects. All these are disappearing somehow, while the economic imperatives are getting stronger and stronger. And like these aims towards employability and educating and training children, young people, adults to become more employable. And these are some issues that we do not really talk about.
Yes, that's a global trend, certainly.
Sorry. The computer battery is running low. You keep on talking with Hanna. I have to get the wire. Sorry.
Sure. Take your time. So, in the sense of what you've just said about your, not just your research interests, your intellectual interests, but I guess also your political interests, would you consider yourself a public scholar? Is that a good label? And if so, what might it mean to you?
Yes, I would, I think. And I think it's a very nice label for me, because I mean, as a feminist scholar, I mean, how I became interested in feminist theory and feminist methodology in the first place, it was because it's a kind of scholarship that doesn't even pretend to be neutral and objective representation of the world as such, but the very starting point of feminist research is that knowledge is always political in the sense that it represents the world from one perspective rather than the other. And I mean, feminist research also explicitly aims at making the world a more kind of just and equal place. And that's the reason why I became a researcher in the first place. So, and I think as a researcher who gets public funding for her research, for example, it's my duty to use my research knowledge to make the world a better place. So yes, it's a very important part of my work, definitely.
I just asked Hanna if she would consider herself a public scholar and what that label might mean, and now I'd like to ask you the same question, Kristiina.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm not a nerd with computers. So, but the problem is fixed now. Yes, good. Of course. I'm a public researcher, and I could agree with everything what Hanna said. This is a public job, and I also consider it as my responsibility to bring to talk about our research and the problems that our research shows to the wider audience, and also to give talks, to give presentations, to write to newspapers, wherever. And I think this is more crucial now than ever. I think we all have this responsibility, and we have to take it very seriously what's going on in society and also in education. And we need to talk about these problems. Although it is, I can say that it is becoming difficult, more difficult, while the economic imperatives are getting stronger. But we can't stop. We need to keep on doing this. To keep on asking the very difficult questions.
Yes, I completely agree, and I very much think that these difficulties, given the current shape of higher education, very much operate on a global scale in different ways. So there are important questions to be asked here about what can be done and what can't be done in current higher education. Concretely, how have you found it difficult to act as public scholars? Are there any specific examples that you both could give?
Yeah, it's a, I think, well, I have, of course, experienced the same kind of difficulties that Kristiina has mentioned, that it's kind of the knowledge that some people don't want to know or hear. But also, like, in my research, I'm interested in knowledge policy relations, and through that kind of interest, it raises different kind of problems as well, because I mean, I think actually in Finland and in many other contexts as well, there is this increasing interest towards evidence-based policymaking, and of course, I think many scholars welcome that that kind of progress, and of course, it means that the role of scientific knowledge and expertise is growing in the society. But I also think that it's a bit problematic in the sense that that politics is not supposed to be technocratic and depoliticized, and political decisions, whether they concern gender equality or COVID-19. I mean, of course, it is important that they are based on knowledge, but at the same time, they are at the heart of politics is that the decisions are ideological and that they are political as well. So I guess as a scholar, I'm always a bit balancing between kind of knowledge and ideology. And as I said before, knowledge definitely also, I mean, always has this political element. So in that sense, knowledge is never, or evidence-based policymaking is never non-political in the sense.
Kristiina,
so
would you like?
Daniel, you asked, about difficulties. Was that your?
Yes, yes.
Well, in terms of education, well, I guess it's never been easy to talk about, for example, about inequalities in education, which tells something quite interesting about our educational system. But while the economic narratives are getting stronger in education, I feel it's even harder to talk about problems. There is so much opportunism going on, and in terms of marketization and privatization and this stronger global education governance. There are new interests, agendas coming in. So of course, for us sociologists, this brings more interesting stuff to focus on in terms of our studies. But I'm really worried about the future of education. It looks quite grim, and not at least because it's so difficult to bring critical questions in, like where is education going? What's the future of education, and what kind of interests there are involved? I feel it's more difficult all the time to talk about these things. Yeah, so I experience this difficulty all the time.
And from these concerns that you've outlined throughout our conversation so far, how did you get to the topic of therapeutic cultures? What took you there as an area of academic interest?
Do you want to start, Kristiina?
Sure. Okay. I have studied therapization and therapeutic culture, therapeutic ethos, therapeutic power for over 10 years. And like I mentioned, I after my PhD, I went to prison, and I wanted to see what's going on in terms of prison education, and there it began. And then my focus moved on to the wider educational system, and while I was in prison doing my research, I got to know brilliant British scholars, and I went to work in British universities where therapeutic power in UK, where therapeutic power was strong, and it was also very actively researched. But I still remember thinking while I was watching what was going on in UK and Australia and USA that this could not come to Finland, or this could not come to Nordic countries, like I saw it happening in these places. But it did. It came to Finland, and it was also apparent in other Nordic countries. And I remember that when I started to study therapization in education, I received a lot of criticism from in my field, from other scholars, but also from policymakers. I remember that people kept saying me like, Kristiina, don't you care that people do really have problems? Like, don't you have empathy? Like, are you a cold person or something? You don't care about people and you're an educationalist. But now, after 2 research projects, quite big research group, after maybe 50 publications or so, we are not criticized anymore. But it took quite a long time before we were able to start talking about these things in a more critical way in Finland. And I still think, if we think about psychologization and therapeutic ethos, things like this, we are still lacking space for more critical debate in terms of this these problematic tendencies that we have now in education and beyond.
Yeah, I don't have as long history with therapeutic cultures as Kristiina does, and actually in my work with Kristiina that we have done together, I think it has kind of brought me closer to the discussions about therapeutic cultures. But I have been interested in the Nordic welfare state reform for quite some time, and also like activation policies and labor market policies in which the unemployed are activated to work via different kind of measures. And it is interesting how the state operates in these kind of activation measures. That, I mean, of course, it still uses the old kind of forms of control, such as sanctions, but increasingly those kind of more hard forms of control are combined with more these like soft forms of control, such as therapeutic policies. Like the unemployed are offered rehabilitation and coaching, so that they can kind of increase their competitiveness or their employability in the labor market. And so I kind of became interested in the way that the Nordic welfare state is becoming more like a coach in its efforts to activate the citizens to be more productive and more active in a sense. So that's how I came to these discussions.
Yes, and I guess what your answers show is the reach of therapeutic discourses and practices and the power they may exert across quite a range of different institutional spheres. So I guess that highlights how important this area of research is. Now, you're working on a very interesting Finnish language book titled Therapeutic Power, Ambivalences of Happiness and Well-Being in Finland in the 2000s. Could you tell me a little bit more about this book? And specifically, I'm very interested in the question what you might mean by therapeutic power.
Do you want to start, Kristiina?
Well, like in terms what I told you about the history, you can maybe imagine how happy I am about the situation where we will have a book in Finnish about therapeutic power taking place in Finland with these dimensions of state, society, communities, individual level. And I'm really proud to do it together with Hanna and also Antti Saari and Esko Harni. brilliant scholars. And I hope the book will raise a lot of public debate. I really do hope that. And in the book, our focus is quite wide. So it really includes different dimensions of our society. And we wanted to show how therapeutic power operates and how it has become such a strong imperative in Finland and with what outcomes. And with therapeutic power, you can continue, Hanna, if I don't, if you think you want to elaborate with the concept further. But I think with the therapeutic power, we want to demonstrate this certain type of power that utilizes psychological expertise and knowledge system, and how it operates while it verbalizes our understanding of human beings and understanding of our lives, aspirations, problems, worries, within psychological frame. And so I believe that this book shows how therapeutic power in different parts of society operates, and how its ideal of this very highly individualized but also very abstract human being is in its center. And this very individualized ideal of human is enticed in different ways to eternally develop oneself, practice self-discipline, self-monitoring, self-control in accordance to psychological, but also economic imperatives or ideologies. So therapeutic power, from my perspective, is a very tricky form of power. While it all, but it also offers like pleasure, satisfaction, experience of empowerment and belonging. Do you want to continue, Hanna?
I can, yeah. Well, I mean, like Kristiina said, it was very important for us to do a book about therapeutic cultures in Finnish, because actually there hasn't been that much discussion in the Finnish context and in Finland and in Finnish about therapeutic cultures. And I think I might add to Kristiina's definition about the therapeutic power that through that form of power, societal problems become defined as issues of individual recovery. And in this book, we analyze, and the other authors as well, we analyze how therapeutic power operates through various institutions and various areas of life, such as prison and work and politics. And as I think one of the main issues in the book is that therapeutic power is a very ambivalent form of power, like Kristiina said, that on the one hand it gives a sense of hope and empowerment to people, I mean from an individual perspective perhaps, and but then on the other hand it gives very little tools for collective action and for societal change. So those are the kind of issues that we bring up in the book.
I wish I could read it, but unfortunately I don't speak Finnish. But it's good that you...
Well, you practice your Finnish. You practice your Finnish.
Yes, I would very much like to. But you've also got very interesting recent English language publications, and I'm referring very specifically to your contribution to our recent joint Handbook of Global Therapeutic Cultures, for which you've both written. So also would like to ask you if you could say a little bit more about what you did for the handbook.
Well,
Hanna, do you want to... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I can start. So I'm so happy that that book has now been published. It's such a great book, and it's it has so, I mean, it investigates therapeutic cultures from such different disciplines and from different perspectives. So I'm really happy to have contributed to that book as well. But I mean, our article in the book, in our article, we analyze the neoliberalization of the Nordic welfare state and the role of therapeutic policies and practices within this reform. And like I said before, it's that we understand therapeutic cultures or therapeutic policies and practices in the article as a form of kind of soft power or soft form of control, and the aim of these therapeutic practices in for example education policies or employment policies is to produce these resilient citizens who provide for their own needs and who constantly develop their competitiveness, and also by treating social problems.
So our conversation was very abruptly cut a moment ago for entirely unknown reasons. So let's pick up straight from where we were. And Hanna, you were talking about your chapter in our handbook.
Yeah, I was just finishing my sentence that about the Nordic welfare state reform and therapeutic practices, that by treating social problems as questions of individual recovery, the state is like constantly divesting its responsibilities towards citizens, and that's one of our, I guess, main arguments in the article. But Kristiina, do you want to continue?
Well, I think you presented our joint article really nicely. And I just think it's the relationship with the therapization and neoliberalism is really crucial and important to study further, and I would love to continue with it. But I can also maybe say, because I have another article there with our research group people from the project Interrupting Youth Support Systems in the Ethos of Vulnerability, where we study how the ethos of vulnerability works in terms of youth education and other support systems and related policies, and how they especially shift these societal structural problems into psycho-emotional vulnerabilities of young adults from very different life circumstances. So we have in our data, we have young people who have lived in prison, we have asylum seekers, migrants, young people who live with poverty, with mental health difficulties and disabilities, and young people who just live outside of official education and labor market systems. So in the article, these and practices contribute in reproducing inequalities instead of overcoming them, and how they position young people in a way that problems are repeatedly attached to them while psychologized and medicalized, which means that solutions to these problems become therapeutic questions of behavioral and emotional work. And it's a and this is just I consider that this kind of orientation is just it getting stronger and stronger, and we do not challenge this type of interventions at all.
Yeah, I would like to follow up what you both said about your chapters with another question. So I guess we are all fairly critical about the social and cultural and political impact of processes of therapeuticization, of psychologization, and the potential they might bear for individual and collective empowerment. This was something that went through my mind a lot today. I read a journal article by Eileen Stein from Rutgers University in Sociological Forum, where she's much more positive about the question of therapeutic politics and emphasizes the ways in which collective political action is always intertwined with questions about individual agency and in the individual search for meaning at a much more personal level, and gives numerous examples of forms of collective agency and empowerment that in the American context particularly have arisen from therapeutic engagements in various forms, with various forms of therapy, various forms of spiritual discourse, and so on. So I guess the question is, there need to be certain social, structural, institutional conditions for such more, let's say, politically effective forms of therapeutically motivated agency to come about. Do you see any potential for that under the institutional conditions in Finland that you have explored? You've talked about a diversity of settings in which you've looked at therapeutic discourses and practices, and I wonder what your assessment there is with regard to any more effective, I don't know if that's the right word, more positive forms of collective agency, political agency, and empowerment. Does that question make sense?
Yes, it does.
Do you want to say something?
Sure, because I have been actually thinking about this a lot lately, because I'm involved in this ethnographic research project that is researching kind of alternative futures and political utopias in Finland. And I think when looking from ethnographic perspective, the focus is on the way that people use therapeutic practices in their everyday lives. And from that perspective, they are maybe not as problematic as from, I guess, more structural perspective. And for example, in book by Suvi Salmenniemi and her colleagues titled Assembling Therapeutics, I think it represents really nicely how, from an ethnographic perspective, how therapeutic cultures can be used for collective agency and criticism as well. And for example, Inna Perheentupa analyzes feminist politics in Russia and how therapeutic practices can offer kind of basis for collective agency as well. So I do think that I mean, it is important to focus on the critical issues, especially from kind of structural and state perspective, but it is also equally important to remember that people might use therapeutic practices in their everyday lives in very creative ways as well, which can offer space for collective action as well, and criticism.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I would like to say that on individual level, if you like, I don't want to say anything because it's not really my business to say anything, and I can. It's not my business if someone wants to read self-help books or go to therapy, or who am I to say that no, you shouldn't do that? And I can also believe what Hanna says, that these therapeutic discourses can be used in different ways and also in creative ways. But I also think that on more collective political level, I think we need to widen the debate and bring more wider perspectives, sociological, philosophical, political perspectives in. And I also, whenever someone asks me whether there is a problem with therapeutic discourse, I usually answer that within therapeutic discourse, one is expected to work with themselves and go and dig deeply and to try to find problems and their solutions from within. But what if there is nothing to find anymore? This is how I usually answer this question. That's what I am concerned about.
That's a very good way of putting it, I would say. And well, there's a lot more to be said about this question. I think it's a fairly difficult problem that's concerned sociologists for a long time. But I think this is as far as we can take it today. So I'd like to say to both of you, thank you very much for taking part in this. Very much enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that we'll be able to continue it elsewhere. So thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Daniel. Bye.
Bye.